All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. ScottHorton.org is the website. Keep all the archives there. 2,500 or so interviews dating back to 2003. All right, our next guest is Stephen Elsberry. Or is it Elsberry? Elsberry, sorry. Regular contributor to the Yahoo network here. The Unlikely Path to Peace with Iran is the latest, I believe. And I think you're the most optimistic of all the Iran situation analysts I talked to on the show. And I think I agree with you a lot of the time. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about this piece, The Unlikely Path to Peace with Iran?
Okay. I was inspired to write it when I came across this quote by Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of Russia's National Security Council. And he said that we are trying to turn Iran from an enemy into a supportive partner, and to achieve this, to change the current regime by whatever means. And it was that term, by whatever means, that struck me. I thought, well, we all assume that it means that we want to overthrow the mullahs in Tehran, but what if it just means that we're looking to change their attitudes within the regime, like keeping the people there, but changing their policies?
That is a very Clintonite thing to do, right? Just change the meaning of the phrase.
Yeah, and especially since why would we want to repeat 1953 all over again, considering all the blowback that brought about?
Or 2003.
Right, yeah. Most recent example.
Well, that makes sense, although, you know, their strategy seems to be, screw you, no matter what you do, we'll always lie about you, we'll always threaten you, we'll always crank up the sanctions, and we'll never repeal them, and there's nothing you could do to ever make nice to us. So what would the Ayatollah have to do other than blow his own brains out to appease these people?
Yeah, you're right about that, because there was a piece by Yusuf Butt where he was analyzing the language of the sanctions and how they're basically designed to continue no matter, even if this whole brouhaha over the nuclear issue was resolved. Mm-hmm. But I still think that we are seeking a deal over the nuclear program, but it doesn't mean that there would be an overall rapprochement with Iran. So we would still be hostile towards them over other issues like their treatment of dissidents, human rights issues, and their support for Hamas and Hezbollah.
Well, but even on the nuclear issue, they asked the impossible. Close down Fordo forever. Although, I guess you could argue that's just their bargaining position to start, and that they really would, after, 10 more meetings, come to a more reasonable type agreement.
Yeah, I just reread a piece recently by Raphael Ahren from the Times of Israel, where he's saying that, we won't find out what the actual real deal is going to be until after the fifth round of talks. Mm-hmm. And that's just a typical Middle Eastern bargaining position, and actually not even all that typical of the Middle East, just a bargaining position in general for everybody.
Right, well, then we gotta hope that they'll have that many meetings, because they went into the first couple saying, we'll never lift the sanctions, no matter what you do, which, when they did that to Saddam Hussein, he said, all right, well, then what I do is going to be much more limited now, if that's how you're going to do it, I worry that that's the point, that really the policy hasn't changed from the Bush policy, that the moderates over there are the enemy and must be marginalized, that we want people who don't want to compromise with us to have the sway and the argument on their side, so that eventually they can bring it to a real conflict.
Yeah, I think we certainly want nationalist politicians over there like Ahmadinejad, who's a loose cannon and will go off at, the slightest reason, pretext. And that benefits us because then we can say, oh, look, here's a threat in the Persian Gulf. We have to keep staying there and make sure that the military budget's never cut because of that.
Mm. All right, well, now, NATO and the whole empire have also bitten off, I think, already more than they can chew in Syria. And they're going to have to see that thing through to the end, because what are they going to do, back down? And that, as the president told Jeffrey Goldberg, that's all about weakening Iran. Consequences of that particular intervention be damned. We have to see it through.
Yeah, I see this all as part of a Cold War, or a pseudo-Cold War against Iran, where we don't really want boots on the ground or occupation, because look how that turned out already in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's unthinkable, and it's also unthinkable to have an internal revolt precipitated by the MEK. And there's also the prince, the son of the Shah, Pahlavi, who recommended that he be supported to lead a revolt inside Iran, sort of form a native Persian brigade. And how could that possibly work, considering how detested that both these two forces are?
Yeah, and these are the leaders of the opposition. This is all the Americans can come up with to be the leaders of the new regime, is the son of the Shah or the MEK commie terror cult.
Right. And that would be disastrous, because they're just not popular at all. I don't see how there would be any support.
I talked with Jeremiah Gulka, who used to work for the RAND Corporation, who went and visited Camp Ashraf in Iraq recently. And he talked about when he went there, they weren't allowed to talk without raising their hand and getting permission. Like, their entire life was spent in a third grade class. And, very regimented sleeping and permission for every little thing. And a very, the kind of cult that you'd see in a Fox cartoon or something, basically. Yeah. Cookie cutter, like how they do it. I guess it was King of the Hill is what I was thinking of, but I couldn't figure out whether it was Family Guy, but they wouldn't have done a thing like that. Yeah, it was King of the Hill, where they joined the cult, and no protein and no sleep, and you must obey or else no one will like you. And it gets pretty bad.
Yeah, there was also a Simpsons episode like that where they joined the cult, the leader.
Right.
He was a gigantic swindler, and Homer was the only one who had any resistance to his propaganda.
Yeah, good times. All right. Anyway, so sorry to take us all off on a cartoon tangent there, but the MEK cult, they really are a sinister little cult of weirdo traitors who, I believe it's a 99.999% unanimous opinion by all factions inside Iran that they are hated and detested as traitors, because they fought on America and Saddam Hussein's side against Iran in the 1980s.
Yeah, and if they gain power, it's not like a liberal democracy is going to flower there whatsoever. There's just no chance of that happening. So it's not really a matter of the fact that there's an authoritarian regime in Iran, because why would we care if we're promoting one?
Right.
Ethically.
Yeah, that certainly isn't the problem. All right, so now, do you have an opinion about whether, before or after the election, you think Obama's really going to try to make a move to solve this thing?
Richard Dreiser said in 2013, so definitely after the election.
All right. Well, Richard Gardner said that? Is that who you said it? Anyway, hold it right there. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Stephen Elsberry. All right, Shell, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. ScottHorton.org is the website where I keep all my archives. I'm talking with Stephen Elsberry. He's a contributor over at yahoo.com. Most recently, he's written The Unlikely Path to Peace with Iran. And I was hoping you could talk to us a little bit about the sanctions. Old sanctions, new sanctions, sanctions by executive orders, sanctions in the Congress, sanctions all around. What effect are these sanctions having on, what's the structure of them? If you could really explain how it is that they work, maybe who's exempt from them and for how long and how that works, and what the effect of these sanctions are on the Iranian people, Stephen.
Okay, well, the sanctions thus far are really designed for, well, they're supposed to be designed for punishing the regime over their non-nuclear weapons program. But actually, they're affecting the private sector, and so this is really promoting all the state-run businesses. It's pretty ironic, actually. As for exemptions and waivers, that just goes to show how we're kind of not totally serious about this whole sanctioning strategy. Because if we were really serious about it, we'd be enraging a lot of people, a lot of the nations like China and India, and also the Europeans too, who are heavily reliant on Iranian oil. And that's why they're getting these exemptions for China for 6 months. And even the Wall Street Journal recognized how this is all like smoke and mirrors. He called it voodoo sanctions, something to that effect.
Mm-hmm. But now, so does that mean that they're not having that much of effect inside the country, since it's really all just, one-sided, but with the back door wide open for continued trade?
Yeah, they are having a pretty bad effect. But at the same time, Iran does see itself as having like a way out. Like they're not completely debarred from trading with China or with these other nations that have been granted waivers. And that's why they're not going to act on the closest Strait of Hormuz.
Mm-hmm.
Because so long as they don't see their backs against the wall, and if they see that there's a way out, they'll be much more inclined to just stay the course and not escalate.
You ever wonder whether the politicians on both sides do a lot of this saber rattling just to jack up the oil price and make things, destabilize things a little bit so that their political friends can make some money, that kind of thing?
Yeah, because at the start of the summer, they have been falling for a while there. And I think after the failure of the most recent of the high-level talks to go anywhere, that actually contributed to the increase of prices, like when they should be falling.
Right. I mean, hey, I was pleased to see that it was in the media. It was, I guess, too obvious to ignore. And they were saying that, hey, all this tension with Iran is driving up the price of oil. I mean, they always want to say something is what's causing the market to do this or that today. And in this case, it was just too clear what that something was, Yeah,
it's true that the tensions are contributing to the rise in price, even though the media would be most apt to blame speculators. And that's the easy scapegoat for them. I think one article did admit that, it's the sanctions doing everything.
Mm-hmm. So, do you really think that that the American policy is, or you're just saying you think it could be, to redefine regime change into make friends with the Ayatollah and pretend we don't mind him so much and that he's going to do what we say at least somewhat from now on or something?
Yeah, it very well could be. I kind of see it like how Iran has its nuclear ambiguity, like will we or won't we decide to build a bomb, and that's sort of like a sword hanging over our head. Well, we're doing kind of the same thing towards them with this, I guess I could call it regime change ambiguity, like will we or won't we try to topple you guys? And it's designed to cause this nationalist reaction over there.
Mm.
Just like how the new strategy in the Pacific is designed to rile up China.
Well, now, so in your view, is Benjamin Netanyahu a wild card in all this, or he'll basically go along with the empire and what it decides?
I actually do wonder if Israel would prefer regime change in Iran, because that would mean that they could potentially become our new favorites in the region, knocking them off to, the closest ally spot. If the same relationship, if we got back the same relationship with Iran as we had with the Shah back in the 70s, and they were the Grenadier of the Gulf, or no, Gendarme of the Gulf, they were called.
Well, and of course, the Israelis had a relationship with post-revolution Iran, with that government for quite a long time, of course, selling them weapons for Ronald Reagan and all that.
Yep. Also going back to the potentiality of this being just a a change within the regime. There's a post by this guy, Thomas P.M. Bartnett, and I don't think he's a neocon, but he sounds a bit hawkish, just because of the way he terms this possible change. He calls it the soft kill option, where it would be, once we recognize the Iranian regime and we open up ties, says that admit the regime is valid, blow off the nuke pursuit, which grants Iran nothing in terms of leverage with anybody, and let the connectivity that results do the rest in terms of regime delegitimizing from within, leading to eventual democratization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when he sells all this, he does assume that, yeah, there'll be an internal revolt and they'll be overthrown. But I would say we should just go for this policy anyway, because the time would be the best path to take. And because also the Hawks' plans always seem to backfire on them. And that's how it would happen.
Well, it seems to me that if they were serious, they would have said at this very first meeting, all right, look, we have to have 6 meetings or whatever the number is before we're allowed to make a deal. So then at that meeting, we'll make the deal. But here's going to be the deal. We promise not to bomb you. You promise to stay within your safeguards agreement. And just make sure that you keep your, plenty of inspectors and plenty of access to Fordo and Natanz, and make sure you keep all your enrichment under 20%. I guess it'd be a bonus if we could get them to do all their up to 20% enrichment done in a foreign place, but I don't really see the need. Doesn't matter. It's not weapons grade at 20% by a long shot. So you just stay within the safeguards agreement. Maybe adopt the additional protocol, the safeguards agreement, something like that. And we'll promise not to bomb you. We'll lift the sanctions, and then we'll be friends, and that's it.
Yeah, or maybe at least lift certain sanctions, at least the ones pertaining specifically to their nuclear program. But I don't see certain other sanctions being lifted, even though that we could reach a deal over the nuclear issue.
Yeah, that's overkill politically, I understand.
Yeah, that's kind of also the reason why there has been a lot of progress, was because the Iranians would like to also address just the overall issue of relations with the U.S. They'd like a rapprochement. They'd like reconciliation. And we're not ready for that quite yet. And they're trying to insinuate that into the nuclear dispute. And they want to include it. And so that's kind of why we're hedging. Because we don't want totally good terms quite yet.
Yeah. And all this going on while we're waging an overt covert war, I guess, against their allies in Syria. They're supposed to just pretend not to notice that, and that it's all about them, and that they know it, and we know they know it, and everybody knows it.
And also all the stalling could be about arming the Gulf states, which they're just getting billions of dollars worth of weapons and arms and fighter jets.
Yep,
so
supposed defensive missiles, yeah.
It's all about building them up, too. So we're going to wait until they're sufficiently stocked, and then we might pivot away from the Middle East to the Pacific, like the Obama administration wants to do.
Yep. And yet, as you're saying, they still don't have anybody but probably even John McCain's fantasy. They can't invade the place with troops. All they can do is carpet bomb and still not get their way. So I guess we have that going for us, that it's so horrible and stupid that maybe they won't do it. Anyway, we're all out of time. Thank you very much for your time. Stephen Elsberry, everybody. Find him at yahoo.com. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.